Welcome back. An extremely important development that we're tracking at this hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin said relations between his country and China are reaching new milestones as Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi wrapped up a visit to Moscow today. Ahead of the war anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Wang Yi met Russian President Vladimir Putin in an apparent move to cement ties between the two nations. The optics assume tremendous significance given its timing, coming close on the heels of US President Joe Biden's visit to Kiev. It also fuels concerns that Beijing could provide material support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The West believes that weapon supplies from China to Russia could threaten a potential escalation of the Ukraine war. It could also lead to a possible confrontation between Russia and China on one side and Ukraine and the West military alliance on the other. And what Wang Yi said today in Russia only validates those concerns. Let's listen in.
当前国际形势确实严峻复杂，但是中俄关系历经国际风云的考验，成熟坚韧，稳如泰山。危机和乱象虽然时常出现在我们的面前，但是危中有机，危可转机。
Joining me here on the program is Mr. Bharat Karnad, who is a strategic affairs expert. Thank you so much, Mr. Karnad, for joining us. I want to begin by actually asking you if you could read into the statements made by Mr. Wang Yi. What he said was crisis can be turned into opportunities. What are you reading into those statements and how are you looking at this particular visit, especially after what Mr. Putin said yesterday, that it is the West that is turning a local conflict into a global conflict? Now, a question can be asked, isn't Russia guilty of the same as it elicits China's support?
Yeah, the problem, I think, here is that you have to have, both sides in the conflict are seeking allies and strategic partners. Obviously, Ukraine has the West, the US and the West on its side, and Russia potentially has China. And Russia, for its own reasons of, shall we say, beefing up its military hardware stocks and so on for a prolonged war that's expected, will want something like China to fall back on in terms of replenishing its military stores and so on. So it's quite possible that that's how Putin at least sees the association with China in the present circumstances.
Right.
As far as China is concerned, I'm not sure that the words by Wang Yi in Moscow, sitting opposite Putin, mean very much.
Okay.
For the simple reason that China is very aware that one wrong move on its part would pretty much shut down the entire Western market on which it relies centrally for its economic prosperity, will shut down. I mean, EU just the other day warned China, do whatever you have to do, but do not send arms. Because that's the tripwire, that's the red line we suggest you not cross. And it was a very definite threat of enormous consequences for China if it continues to not just rhetorically side with Moscow, which is okay, which is fine, but not back it up with the kind of military support that the US and the West, ironically, are giving Ukraine. So this is where I think China faces a dilemma that, it cannot go too far in realizing what Putin would like by way of an association that is substantive and is helpful to the Russian military cause.
Yes, what you're saying is extremely interesting. Rhetorical support is fine. It should not be backed up with military support. And there is a terse warning, a tacit warning from the West to that effect to China. And China would dare not cross that line. But, I take that point, but I want to ask you that in this entire dynamics, India is in a very precarious position, isn't it? Can it be seen on the same side as China, as because of its, of course, dependence on Russia, among other things, defense artillery? Can it really be seen supporting Ukraine as it is expected to, since its democratic credentials are at stake?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a misreading on your part.
Okay.
Nothing is at stake. I think Jaishankar the other day said very correctly that what is Europe's problems cannot be seen by Asia as Asia's problems. These are European problems. Let the European states deal with it. A nation state like India has nothing really in that sense, no stake in the conflict other than to wish it end and that both parties resolve the matter. So no, we are not in any case either on the same level as China, for instance. And everybody knows that. We are not economically that powerful. We do not have the kind of bilateral trade with the West, US and the West, that China has. And we certainly don't have the kind of economic and military relationship that China has with Russia. But that said, the fact that China seems to be siding with Moscow will give us more space actually for maneuver, because West will see that if you push India too much on the Russia issue, as far as energy dependence, for instance, or purchases of hardware, the S-400 air defense systems, etc., you may then compel Delhi to willy-nilly sign with Moscow. And that will make for a very, very hefty triumvirate of Russia, China, and India on the Eurasian landmass, which is something that the US and the West simply cannot, will not be able to handle in a very real sense, because India then is also central to the Indo-Pacific. So that's the reason why India, as you have seen, have been given so much latitude in maneuvering that both the US and the European countries have said, okay, that's fine. The Indian case is an exception. We hold every other country to a more stricter line than we do India, for the simple reason, they never say so, but for the obvious reason that they cannot afford to have India on the Russian and the Chinese side.
Interesting. But, Mr. Karnad, the fact of the matter is, and you mentioned this, you said that except for India to wish it to end, there's nothing much that is at stake. Mr. Putin believes that, at this point, it is the West that is trying to, in a way, fish in troubled waters or nudging Ukraine. And Russia, it seems, at least at one point, it did seem like Mr. Putin was making peace overtures. He said, we are ready for negotiations. So when you say that we wish it to end, how do you see this going from here on? What are the possibilities?
Look, I think one thing is, very, very definite and sure. Russia will not vacate its presence from the Donbas region and the eastern corridor that connects the Russian mainland through eastern Ukraine to Crimea and the Crimean Peninsula and the access to the Black Sea. That the Russians will not vacate. And in a fight against Ukraine, Ukraine is nothing very much, in terms of actual and substantive power. Yes, they've shown a will to resist Russia and so on. But if it comes to an ultimate fight, it doesn't stand a chance, except insofar as NATO is trying to come in on the Ukraine side. Here's where Putin's warning yesterday in his very long speech, and very elaborate speech in a way, which laid out the entire, shall we say, the roadmap for the future for Russia.
Yes.
For instance, he pretty much said, he has withdrawn Russia from the strategic arms reduction talks, which the only remaining treaty involving nuclear weapons that the two countries had until yesterday. Earlier, Trump had withdrawn from the Intermediate Forces Treaty in Europe. So, between the two sides, they have pretty much given up on all arms control. And so that is a signal to America that, look, we are willing, that Putin is sending, that Russia is willing to stand on its interests, which require it to have the Donbass, which is a Russian-speaking eastern region of Ukraine that is a corridor, a bridge, as it were, between the Russian mainland and the Crimean Peninsula that it already annexed in 2014. So that will not be given. Let's now talk about what to do next.
Right.
We will then stop there. And that's been always on offer, by the way. This was the baseline on offer. But I think President Zelensky got a little carried away with the kind of military help that the Western countries promised and have been delivering. So he thinks really that he'll be able to match the Russian military forces and may even win over them, which is it's really a delusion.
In the middle of all this, the statement from Mr. Putin that there will be no further participation in the nuclear arms control treaty, do you see that as alarming and concerning as well for the rest of the world?
Well, no. I mean, it's very good for India. I mean, India, should begin to think independently, really. We cannot ride everybody's coattails as we've been doing for 70 years. We have our own interests, and we have no stake in any arms control. Okay. We are a burgeoning power. We are a budding power. We are not reached there. So why do we act as if we are, we already attained something? We are nothing as yet. We are a very minor power as power of countries go. We have lots to accomplish. Right. And as far as military power and nuclear power in particular is concerned, we are just very at the infant stage with very, shall we say, not credible weapons and so on. We have to begin nuclear testing, etc. We have to begin to have a whole panoply of, variety of thermonuclear weapons and long-range missiles and cruise missiles and so on to come up somewhere to have notional parity at least with China. That's where we have to go before we start talking arms control and so on and so forth. That's for the Russians and the Americans to worry. Yes. We should be no part of it because no arms control is in India's interest.
Right. Putting things in perspective, setting the record straight for us. Thank you so much, Mr. Bharat Karnad. Thank you for joining us today. Right. With that, in fact, there's another update that we